Welcome to the Place of Rest, where our aim is to give you language that helps you displace the growing confusion, chaos, and dis-ease of our times. My name is Jonathan Boyce, and it's my pleasure to bring to you today's episode. Today we are starting a new series in which my wife and I talk with Virginia about our son's health journey and the consequence of key principles of rest. We hope you enjoy today's conversation. Virginia, we have a little bit of an unusual podcast series that we're going to be unfolding here in the next few weeks.
Yes, we do.
We thought we'd take a little bit of a break and share our story because as we've begun to see how it has unfolded, and some people may have heard little bits and pieces from past episodes, but there's been a crucible that we've been kind of going through with our own son, and we've seen how rest is woven throughout all of it. We want to give a little bit of context before we take a deep dive into what we've been going through over the past 2 years with our son. But we thought that this would be so useful for people to see and hear his story, our story, and how his story could help people step into rest by seeing the principles, how they've been applied, and not that we have been applying them perfectly by any stretch of the imagination, but we are seeing such a beautiful story unfold in his life and in ours. So, and this is all due to rest. So who are we? We are Jonathan and Amanda Boyce. We are on the R.E.S.T team in the East Coast. R.E.S.T is based in Irvine, California, but we are on the East Coast. In this series, what we want to do is we want to discuss living from a place of rest, which is relational, emotional, and spiritual truth. And we want to look at this through the lens of the health challenge of Hudson, our son, that he's experienced. So we're excited not to just share this from our perspective, but also to hopefully allow some of the practitioners who have worked with Hudson to see it from their perspective as well and see how rest has so beautifully integrated into all of these healing modalities for him.
So this is wonderful because just for the sake of our listening audience, it's not just the framework of a very complicated, frankly traumatizing situation in the life of sweet Hudson, who is 5 years old. 4 years old now. But you're also going to hear, this is going to be very unusual because you're going to hear directly from the conventional and conventional trained, but also integrative genius who the collaborative effort of all has been instrumental in sustaining you through this.
Mm-hmm. Yes.
Yeah. But I think it's the expertise and the knowledge that is so in alignment with these, what we call laws of nature, self-evident truth that appeal to our natural affection, with these universal principles, if you will, of how our system operates, that I think is going to be shocking for people. And I think it's going to be instrumental in giving our listening audience perhaps a broader perspective of why rest is that center hub around all these modalities, so that wherever they find themselves in, whatever they find themselves in, they can identify with your story today. So Thank you so much to both of you for sharing.
You're welcome. Thank you for having us.
So there are a few statements that are often repeated around rest, and that is, you are a spirit working through a soul in a body. Another one that we hear often when we've said a lot is, your story doesn't begin at home. It begins in the home of your parents' parents. So as we begin to unpack this conversation and this story of our son, we hope that people will see an example of these little statements in action, to see the truth of them.
Mm-hmm. That's really powerful.
Yeah, so we can talk about these freely and reason together and examine how we got to this place of really chaos in his little body. But we can do that without shame or fear or blame. There's no pointing fingers at this person or that person. It's just a showing up in a wonder. And we are seeing how like portals have been opened, and the attack is on our children. I mean, we've seen it mentally, emotionally, spiritually, but it seems like in these last few years, it's gotten to a fever pitch of physical chaos as well. And so our hope is, in hearing this story, you might know of somebody that can hear this, hear the hope, and be able to give hope to other people that you know who might be struggling, if not yourself.
Yeah. And Jonathan, I'm so glad that you calmly and systematically laid out the heart behind this conversation. It is our desire to bring hope to people, regardless of where they find themselves, regardless of the measure of pain, loss, and perhaps fear, confusion, chaos, and dis-ease that sometimes can be so destabilizing. We want to bring you hope.
So, a little context about kind of how we got here. We met Virginia back in April of 2018 when my mom and dad went to California from Michigan for cancer treatment. They were patients at the Center for New Medicine and began working with Virginia at that time. And throughout the course of the next few months, as each one of us children came and spent time with my parents, we also in turn got to work with Virginia. And it was such an impactful situation. There are 8 of us children, and throughout those 9 months that unfolded with my parents there, I think all 8 of us ended up working with you, Virginia. And it was just incredible opportunity, and to see the transformation that happened in my family in those months was
beautiful.
Yeah. So then January of 2019, my mom ended up passing away, and it was really the work that had been started in those months that, for lack of a better word, really like sustained us and helped us navigate some really murky, muddy, messy things that come along with end of life. And Jonathan and myself, we continued to work with you, Virginia. We saw the value, saw the transformation, and began plugging away at our own stuff.
Yeah. Well, if some people may be somewhat familiar with my story from previous episodes, but I was suffering my own health challenge at a very young age in the prime of my life, found myself not being able to walk. So it was like when we saw the transformative power of R.E.S.T from that short time of working with youth, with Amanda's parents, it was like, wow, I need to learn more. So I kept coming back and was able to begin walking again, which was miraculous in and of its own right.
That was amazing. That was an amazing season.
Yeah.
You literally applied everything from day one with great consistency, perseverance, and I remember specifically with you, Jonathan, and as is necessary for everyone, but it began to transform the way you viewed life.
Yeah.
The way you viewed your faith, the way you viewed your soul, your mind, your heart, your will, your conscience, and how you negotiated those things. And then the way you viewed your body and the confusion, chaos, and dis-ease it found itself in. And I think what was really gripping is how your tenacity, your perseverance, and you too, Amanda, and supporting all this, but really understanding, I think striving to understand, I should say, the deeper mysteries of the inner workings that make up the I am part of us. And it's just been a remarkable thing to witness. I can't believe, Amanda, it's been 7 years. 7 years.
Wow.
So, wow. I just have to say, wow.
To what you said, Virginia, about starting to view our body differently, I think that that's a really significant part of this, is that statement that you said earlier, Jonathan, of we are a spirit working through a soul in a body. And that we have, in our current climate, and there's decades and there's a lot that's gone into the fracture of our image, but we view our spirituality, our soul, our body very fragmented, very segmented. And
Yes.
if you're open to spiritual things, you go to church, or there's other ways that you delve into that, but that's separate from your physiology, your body. You go to the doctor to get help with that. And maybe if you've experienced enough trauma or you're broken enough, you go see a therapist and you work on the soul level. But all of those things are very, very fragmented and fractured. But what we were beginning to learn as we were delving into the principles of rest is like, no, those aren't fractured and fragmented. They're one. Our image is a spirit, a soul, and a body. And
Yes.
what shows up in one has a constitution in the other, and you cannot pull them apart. They are one. And so that the crippling autoimmune condition, these things that our body was saying to us, all of a sudden began, we weren't at odds with it. It was like, oh, it's telling us something. Like, let's figure out what it's telling us. And especially even in the beginning, when all of it was so new, at times it felt overwhelming. And but
Often.
Yeah, very often. But that, as we've continued and persevered and pursued, it has continued to bring more integration, more integrity and understanding, which brings freedom. And when these things show up in our body, whether it's autoimmune condition or even just a fever or whatever, it's like
chronic depression,
Yeah.
chronic
Yeah.
anxiety.
Yeah,
Yes, there are environmental factors.
absolutely.
But first, we begin to unpack the spiritual,
Mhm.
the mind, the heart, the will, the conscience, the feelings, and the body, right?
Mhm.
Simultaneously, I might
Yeah.
say.
Yeah.
We approach these things simultaneously.
Yes.
Yes.
So it's not just the popping of the pill, which sometimes is necessary,
Mhm.
sometimes, not always,
Mm-hmm.
but
Absolutely.
it's not the answer.
Yes.
I think that's it. It is not the
Mm.
answer. And you don't have to live crippled
Yes.
by that. You said something really interesting that for some reason it struck me. You mentioned our Constitution is a spirit,
Mhm.
which, if you delve into what we've learned from quantum physics,
Mhm.
I recently was invited to participate in a closed meeting at the Stephen Hawking's Institute in Cambridge. And it was fascinating to hear these geniuses, I might add, who live and operate and think in a whole other realm. And they, of course, were speaking the language of science in that spiritual realm, which to me, the music, it's all music, right? The language of science is the voice of God, is the art of the story. So I look at these things differently. But hearing these geniuses speak, I was able to fully, although I only understood 40% of what they were saying, I was able to extract unthinkable things from their conversation because I understood the matrix of rest, the Trinitarian constitution that shows up in the creative order of all things is going to emerge in conversations. And because I understood that, I was able to extract unthinkable things that are relevant to where we're headed with rest in a conversation that I feel like I just got a glimpse into heaven. And it occurred to me that that spiritual realm can be understood in the context of physics, quantum physics, but it can only be applied with a working understanding of rest, because they and I live worlds apart. I need them and they need me. And these information systems must converge. So when you spoke about constitution, I was thinking about that conversation that I had, and the entire constitution and context of that conversation was in a realm most of us really never get a glimpse of, per se, especially even as an academic or as a scholar. We're so entrenched in our own spheres of influence. But that was a realm, and it's 1/3 of our constitution. Because the other one is our mind, our heart, our will, our conscience, and our feelings. And no other human being has dominion over that in your anatomy, no matter where you find yourself. Nobody has dominion over that sphere unless you forfeit that control.
Mm.
And then, of course, there is the body. But while you said, and while you referenced our constitution, I thought, yes, yes. And the consequence of that conversation between that quantum field, that spiritual field, the place where I believe God reigns, and then our soul, where I believe, if we open ourselves up, is the dwelling place of God. And that's why so much transformation happens when people have, Russell Brand comes to mind, when they have this incredible conversion. More recently, Tucker Carlson, which I did not know, but he full on had an encounter with a demon. That was his transformation. And Russell Brand has his story, but those are like big name, well-known figures that can bridge the gap if what we're saying seems too confusing. And then, of course, it's changed how they live, the marching orders their brain gets from their soul to live differently. But your word constitution, while you were speaking in the context in which we're going to be discussing Hudson, caused me to think of the word consequence. The inner workings of the conversation that we have among these constituents, our spirit, our soul, and our body, has consequences. And they will expand your life and the quality of your life, or diminish it. Just before we got on this podcast today, Hudson has been the object of my affection for many, many years since he was born, but in a different way since he began to suffer. Because I stood in the gap with both of you as you navigated that. And in some way, I was suffering with you every day.
Yeah.
And so frustrated that I was so far away. And I heard God say, wait, what about me? When life takes your breath away, don't forget to think about me and that you bear my image. And I've given you all the resources you need to thrive, not just to exist. And even driving in today and the pilgrimage of my own life and some things that are really near and dear to my heart, I'm reminded that every single time we declare that I am, you're referencing a spirit in you that's working through a soul in a body. And the only person in recorded history that identified himself as I am, according to ancient documents, and I scoured them all, is God. When Moses, well-recorded story, came face to face with God, he said, "Who are you?" And he said, "I am that I am." So every time we did make that declarative statement of an I am, we should all be reminded that we have these powerful constituents that are uniquely designed to live in balance, harmony, and coherence with each other and thrive, regardless of what this popular term, the diagnosis is. So I just wanted to thank you for that. Understanding our Constitution has consequences, and they can expand your life or diminish it.
I was just going to ask real quick, if you don't mind, when you use the word consequence, I think often we can go to the negative of that. Can you maybe give a general definition of consequence? I think this has significant weight.
Result. As a man thinks in his heart, so he is. Take every thought captive and negotiate the complexities of the transactions in your heart. Because out of the abundance of what's in your heart, the mouth speaks. And what you speak, you will become.
This is so good. And I think so powerful in the context of talking through this journey with Hudson. And as parents, having the courage to look at the consequence of our decisions, how we've governed our Constitution. It is easy to fall into shame, blame, fear, and that is not at all what we are talking about when we talk about the Constitution and the consequence. It is.
It's the result. Exactly. That's right.
That's such a good definition. So I guess if there are parents out there listening and thinking about their children and what their children may be going through and what the consequence, what the result of their decisions is on their children, you can do that. You can think, you can examine without fear, without shame, without blame. And that is the path to freedom.
Wow. That is profound. Jonathan, give us a teaser into the next episode so people can understand the importance of this series that you strategically planned.
Next episode, we want to talk about some of the actual timeline to begin unfolding and unpacking some of the story so that we can see the different narratives that have begun to reveal themselves in Hudson's anatomy, in his physiology. And
here, for those who don't know, we're talking about a healthy, thriving 2-year-old boy that out of the blue began to have grand mal seizures.
Yep.
And the story that is forthcoming that unfolds is gripping. Why?
Because the principles of rest revealed what would otherwise be out of the blue, like as you mentioned, like a healthy boy out of the blue. What is with all of this confusion, chaos, and dis-ease going on in his body? We would have had no framework or understanding of where to even begin to look. But because of rest, even in all of the tears, the ashes, we were able to have hope. And looking and examining the foundations, examining the narratives, examining potentially healing modalities rather than anything that would be constrictive or labeling or diagnosing, as you mentioned that word.
Well, it's limited, right? The diagnosis, the treating, and the cure is limited.
Yeah.
It's limited, it's confining, and I don't believe it's the end-all model. Because really the diagnosis is confusion, chaos, and disease among our 3 constituents, our spirit, our soul, and our body. The question is, where's the breakdown in communication? You did work with a functional neurologist and some amazing doctors, conventional doctors, I might add. that were very helpful, but it was limited in the results, if I understand. Maybe you could speak about that as we close this segment.
I like that you use the word limited, because we kept hearing from the beginning of this journey with him that God was saying he is a spirit working through a soul in a body. So when we would go after something spiritually, there were great measures of freedom and there were limits. And that's when we would hear that still small voice reminding us he's a spirit working through a soul in a body.
Wow.
And then we would get to measures of healing in mentally, emotionally, in his soul. And then there were limits to that. And we would begin to start reeling again, but then we'd hear that again, that still small voice. He's a spirit working through a soul in a body. And we would approach things from a physical level all the time. Still, it was never condemning. It was never, hey, stop what you're doing. Like, listen to me. It was always, hey.
It isn't an all or nothing.
Yes, it was, hey, remember, he's a spirit working through a soul and a body. And then it's like, oh, yes, that's right. He's a whole being. We need to approach this as a whole, integrated.
Jonathan, Amanda, words fail me. I'm looking at you two, and my heart is full. I hope echoes of this ring throughout the world. Our podcast is broadcasted and well received internationally. And I hope the implications of what you're about to share with us in the next segment, I hope it's transformative in the lives of our listeners. Thank you.
Thank you, Virginia.
We hope listening to this episode has brought you closer to experiencing the freedom of wholeness and healing. If you have questions or comments about today's episode, or for updates about R.E.S.T, please visit our Instagram or Facebook at The Place of R.E.S.T. If you would like more information about Virginia, or to support and join the cause of R.E.S.T, please go to theplaceofrest.com/donate or call 949-289-5935. Thank you for listening to Rest with Virginia Dixon. We'll see you next week.